He handed her $1 for cookies, then she showed him a photo. "That's my dad," she said. His heart stopped. It was him. A daughter he never knew existed. Before we get started, leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from so we can say hello to you. Now, on to the story. The wind swept briskly through the concrete canyons of Manhattan's financial district, rustling the hems of tailored coats and scattering golden leaves across the sidewalk like confetti from a forgotten celebration. It was the kind of late autumn afternoon that made even the city's millionaires pause between meetings to sip overpriced espresso or take the long way back to their cars. Jonathan Reed did neither. At 42, he had mastered the art of avoiding distractions. As the CEO of Reed Investments, his name echoed in boardrooms from New York to Zurich. His empire was built on precision, on seeing patterns others missed, on moving faster, smarter, colder. Today had been another victory. The Norton merger had finalized, projections were up 30%, and the board was practically foaming at the mouth to toast him. But Jonathan wasn't celebrating. He barely heard the numbers anymore. "Your car is waiting," his assistant called as they stepped out of the sleek glass tower bearing his name. Jonathan adjusted the cuffs of his navy overcoat. "I'll walk," he replied flatly, waving off the confused assistant before slipping into the stream of pedestrians. He didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was the emptiness clawing at the edges of his chest again. Maybe it was just the wind. 3 blocks later, something, or rather, someone, stopped him cold. A small table stood crooked on the sidewalk near the corner of Fifth Avenue. It was made of cardboard and duct tape, held together with what looked like hope. Behind it stood a little girl, maybe 6 years old, her auburn hair lit like fire by the fading sunlight. She was meticulously arranging small bags of cookies with the kind of focus only children and surgeons possess. A hand-lettered sign sat in front of her. "Homemade cookies, $1. Help my grandma get better." He wasn't sure what hit him first. The handwriting. The hair. Or the eyes. She looked up. Hazel. But not just hazel. Golden flecks danced in her irises, eyes that didn't just look familiar. They were his. "Hello, mister," she said with a voice small but steady. "Would you like to buy a cookie? They're really good. Only $1. Jonathan knelt, stunned into stillness by a force more powerful than any stock crash or hostile takeover. "What's your name?" "Lily Anderson," she said proudly. "My grandma taught me how to bake, but she's sick now. I'm helping." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp bill. "I'll take them all." Her eyes widened. "All of them? Really?" As she fumbled in her apron pocket to count change, something fluttered out and landed on the sidewalk between them. A photograph. He picked it up. Froze. It was him. 10 years younger, laughing with his arm around a woman whose name hit him like a freight train, Caroline Anderson. "That's my daddy," Lily said simply, tucking the photo back into her pocket. "I never met him. Mommy said he was special. She said he'd help us one day." Jonathan's throat clenched. He couldn't breathe. The little girl with his eyes, was his daughter. "Thank you for buying my cookies," she said brightly, gathering her earnings. "Grandma's going to be so happy." As she turned and skipped away, the city buzzed on around him, horns, footsteps, a distant saxophone, but Jonathan Reed stood frozen on the sidewalk, his world irrevocably altered. He thought he had everything. Until a 6-year-old stranger with his eyes called him daddy without. That night, Jonathan Reed sat alone in his penthouse, the floor-to-ceiling windows casting fractured reflections of the Manhattan skyline across the glass table before him. The city below glittered with life, pulsing with purpose, but inside, everything felt still, quiet, almost suffocating. His hands rested on either side of a single photograph, the one that had changed everything. His younger face smiled back at him from years ago, arms slung casually around a woman he had spent a decade trying to forget. But he could no longer afford to. Caroline Anderson. Even her name carried weight, like a memory too heavy to carry but impossible to set down. A professor of English literature. Auburn hair like fire under sunlight. A laugh that broke through his guarded world like a melody in the middle of war. They'd met 10 years ago at a university fundraising gala, him, a rising star in finance, her, a passionate academic who believed words could change lives. She had been so unlike anyone in his world. He remembered that night like it was yesterday. The champagne in his glass had gone untouched as she spoke about her love of children's books and poetry. "So, you're in the business of betting on futures," she had teased when he explained hedge funds. "Then we're not so different. I just bet on words." For 6 months, they built a life that existed outside the rules of Wall Street. Long weekend drives up the coast. Cooking pasta badly in his sterile bachelor kitchen. Falling asleep mid-conversation with books scattered across the floor. She was light where he was dark, spontaneous where he was calculated. And slowly, impossibly, Jonathan had begun to believe in more than money. Then came the offer from London. A chance to open a European division of Reed Investments, with a projected valuation in the billions within 5 years. Harrison, his uncle and guardian since he was 12, had been relentless. "It's not just a career move, it's legacy," he'd said over dinner one night, dabbing his mouth with a cloth napkin. "You didn't come this far to fall for a girl who teaches poetry." Jonathan had tried to resist. "Caroline is different," he'd confessed. But Harrison's answer had been cold and calculated. "So was your father's idealism. And that's why he died broke, leaving you with nothing but stories. I gave you purpose." Jonathan remembered staring at the bottom of his wine glass, knowing what was expected. Knowing what would be lost. On his last night with Caroline, her apartment smelled of jasmine and possibility. She had poured him tea and told him about a job offer, Paris, a visiting professorship. "It's not far from London," she'd said, eyes hopeful. "We could make it work." But Harrison had already arranged society introductions. Meetings. A strategic dating opportunity with the daughter of a shipping magnate. "I need to focus on the business," Jonathan had told her. "It requires everything I have." She didn't cry. She just looked at him like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. "So, we were a placeholder. A nice distraction before the real game started." He couldn't even say goodbye properly. He left a note. Flowers. And silence. 3 calls from her came that first week. He never answered. Eventually, they stopped. He'd buried her memory the way he buried most inconvenient things, beneath numbers, meetings, power plays. And in time, he convinced himself it had been the right decision. That she had moved on, too. But now, staring at the photo of her daughter, their daughter, with his eyes and Caroline's auburn hair, the illusion shattered. All these years, he'd believed he had chosen success. Now he knew the price. And the cost had a name. Lily. A little girl who'd grown up without a father because he'd believed ambition was enough. Jonathan closed his eyes and leaned back, the weight of a decade crashing down on him. For the first time in years, he felt truly lost. And the ghost of the woman he left behind had never felt closer. Jonathan stood in the center of his penthouse, the city lights of Manhattan sparkling behind him like a million blinking lights. The truth was suddenly a stranger he'd never met, and it was wearing the face of a 6-year-old girl. He couldn't stop pacing. His mind ran loops around the image of Lily's eyes, that photo of him and Caroline, and the way she'd said, "That's my daddy," like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Her name, Lily Anderson, echoed in his head. It was all too much. Too fast. Needing answers, he grabbed his laptop and typed Caroline Anderson, English professor. A dozen academic articles popped up, Shakespearean analysis, children's literature journals, a conference panel from 5 years ago. Then, buried between dry academic listings, a link hit him like a punch to the chest. Obituary, Caroline Elizabeth Anderson, 1983 to 2024. His breath caught. The words blurred as he read. Passed peacefully after a battle with cancer. Beloved daughter of Margaret Anderson. Loving mother to Lily Anderson. There was no mention of him. No clue that Jonathan Reed had once been part of Caroline's life. And why would there be? He sank into his leather couch, numb. She was gone. The woman he once loved, the woman he abandoned, had died, and he never even knew. He hadn't just missed her final moments. He had missed years of her life. Years of his daughter's life. Swallowing the rising guilt, he searched again, this time typing Margaret Anderson, New York. Among several results, one stood out like a flare in the dark. Help Grandma Margaret beat cancer, GoFundMe. The headline was followed by a photo of Lily, those same hazel eyes, and an elderly woman smiling beside her. The caption read, raising $150,000 for critical treatment. Only $2,000 raised. Jonathan's stomach twisted. They were struggling. While he sat in this ivory tower with custom artwork and vintage wine cellars, his daughter was selling cookies to buy medicine for her dying grandmother. The intercom buzzed, cutting through the silence. "Sir," came his assistant's voice, hesitant. "Mr. Harrison is in the lobby. He's insisting." Jonathan stiffened. Of course he was. Moments later, Harrison Reed strode into the room, immaculately dressed, every inch the powerful patriarch who had built Jonathan's career like a sculptor molding marble. "What's this about canceling meetings?" Harrison demanded without preamble. "The Singapore investors expect." "I met someone yesterday," Jonathan interrupted, voice cold and distant. "A little girl selling cookies on Fifth Avenue." Harrison's expression remained unreadable. "And this relates to business, how?" "She had a photo," Jonathan said. "Of me and Caroline Anderson." For the first time in years, Harrison flinched. Jonathan pressed forward. "She's my daughter, Harrison." "You can't be certain of that," Harrison replied, far too quickly. "She has my eyes. My mother's hair." Harrison's voice sharpened, just enough to sting. "You think you're the first wealthy man approached with a sob story? This has scam written all over it." "Caroline died last year," Jonathan said softly, eyes locked on Harrison's. "Lily is all that's left." A long pause. Then, quieter, "I'm sorry to hear that." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "She tried to reach me. Did you know?" Harrison straightened his cuffs. "You were in London. You needed focus, not distractions." Jonathan stared at him, suddenly seeing the man who had always controlled the narrative. Who had steered every decision. Who might have stolen 6 years from him. "I'm going to find out the truth," Jonathan said, voice low and dangerous. "Of course," Harrison replied. "But discreetly. Let me have the security team." "No," Jonathan snapped. "This is personal." And for the first time in his life, Jonathan Reed felt like a man stepping out from behind a shadow that had followed him for decades. This wasn't about stocks, or deals, or percentages anymore. This was about a daughter he never knew existed. And the woman who had tried, again and again, to tell him. And someone had made sure he never heard. Jonathan Reed sat stiffly on the edge of a threadbare couch in the modest Brooklyn apartment, a world away from the glass-walled empire he ruled in Midtown. The scent of old books and chamomile hung in the air, comforting and sharp all at once. His $1,000 suit suddenly felt out of place, too tailored for the vulnerability pressed against his ribs. Across from him, Lily sat cross-legged, her small hands proudly flipping through a notebook filled with crayon drawings and arithmetic worksheets. "Do you want to see my space story?" she asked, her hazel eyes wide with anticipation. Jonathan swallowed. I'd love to. She beamed, flipping to a page where stick figures floated among stars. That's Grandma and me on Mars. Mommy's the shooting star. She watches us from up there. The room tilted slightly. He wasn't sure if it was the gravity of her words or the truth they pointed to, but either way, he felt it. Margaret Anderson watched him from her armchair like a hawk. Her eyes were lined with suspicion sharpened by years of survival. She had said little since inviting him in, but every glance reminded Jonathan that her trust was not freely given. I gave you all my cookies, and you gave me lots of money, Lily said innocently. Are you a magician? Jonathan chuckled softly. No, I'm just someone who wants to help. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Why, Mr. Reed? Jonathan looked at her, his throat tight. Because I think Lily is my daughter. Because I never knew she existed. And because it breaks something inside me to know I missed her first steps, her first words, everything. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lily returned to her drawing as if the tension wasn't weighing down the room like smoke. We don't need charity, Margaret finally said, her tone clipped. Especially not from ghosts. It's not charity, Jonathan replied, his voice low but steady. It's responsibility. Margaret leaned forward, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. You're a decade late for responsibility. I know, he said, and it nearly choked him. But I want to start now. If you'll let me. Margaret sighed and stood, walking slowly to the bookshelf. She pulled down a faded photo frame and handed it to him. Inside was a picture of Caroline, radiant, laughing, holding a baby girl. Lily. She was swaddled in a yellow blanket, her tiny fists curled near her cheeks. She never told anyone else who the father was, Margaret said quietly. But she kept this picture on her nightstand until the day she died. Jonathan's fingers trembled as he held it. I should have been there. Margaret looked at Lily, who was now humming to herself on the floor, coloring stars in her Mars adventure. She deserves the truth, she said. But she also deserves stability. And right now, she doesn't know who you are. Jonathan nodded. Then I'll earn that right, one step at a time. Lily looked up at him and smiled. You're nice, Mr. Reed. You talk like my books. Jonathan managed a smile, but his chest was in knots. What do you do? She asked. I work with numbers, he replied. I help money grow. Her eyes lit up. Could you help Grandma's money grow? She needs more so she won't be sick anymore. Jonathan's heart fractured. Lily, that's enough, Margaret said sharply, but Jonathan shook his head. It's okay, he said. I'd like to help, if you'll let me. Margaret looked at him a long time before nodding slowly. One step at a time, Mr. Reed. For her sake, not yours. Jonathan met her gaze. That's the only reason I'm here. As he stood to leave, Lily ran to him, her little arms wrapping around his waist in a quick, unexpected hug. Thanks for buying all my cookies, she whispered. Come back soon, okay? Jonathan gently touched her hair, the same auburn as Caroline's, and said the only promise that mattered now. I will. Jonathan sat in the dim light of his penthouse study, the city's skyline a blur beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart pounding from the whirlwind of revelations that had uprooted everything he thought he knew. The DNA results lay open on the screen, undeniable, final. He was Lily's father. The truth both anchored and shattered him. For 6 years, she had lived in this world with his blood in her veins, his eyes staring back at him from a stranger's face, and he'd had no idea. Unable to sit still, he rose and began pacing, every footstep echoing on the polished hardwood like a heartbeat. He could hear her voice again in his mind, that's my daddy. Mommy said he was special. The photo, her eyes, the way she had smiled at him with so much trust. It wasn't just coincidence. It had been fate. And now he had to face what came next. His phone buzzed. It was his assistant. "Sir, Mr. Harrison is in the lobby insisting on seeing you." Jonathan's jaw tightened. Of course. Harrison always had a sixth sense for things shifting out of his control. "Send him up," he replied, voice cold and clipped. Moments later, Harrison Reed stepped through the double glass doors, still immaculate in a navy suit, eyes sharp and unreadable beneath silver brows. The man who had raised Jonathan, shaped his entire career, now felt like a stranger. "I hear you canceled 3 meetings this morning," Harrison began without pleasantries. "Including the Singapore investor call. What the hell is going on?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the credenza, poured himself a glass of water with a trembling hand, then turned. "I met a girl," he said evenly. 6 years old. Selling cookies on Fifth Avenue. Harrison scoffed. "You skipped international investment deals for a charity case?" "She had a photograph," Jonathan continued, voice darkening. "Of me. With Caroline Anderson." A flicker of something crossed Harrison's face. Recognition. Panic. Then it vanished behind his usual mask. "That professor? From years ago?" he asked. "So what?" Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "So what? She's my daughter, Harrison. Lily is mine." There was a long silence. "You can't know that," Harrison finally said, calmly but with steel underneath. "Women like her, they see a man like you, with money, power. Caroline is dead." The words cut through the air like a blade. "Cancer. Last year." This time, Harrison faltered. For the first time in Jonathan's memory, his uncle looked human. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said after a pause. "But this still doesn't change anything. You need proof. You can't just believe a child's story and a photo." Jonathan took a slow breath, fighting the rage boiling inside him. "I have proof. A DNA test. She's mine." Harrison stepped back slightly, eyes narrowing. "You're about to throw away your entire career for a girl you met yesterday." "I'm about to reclaim the only thing that ever mattered." The room pulsed with tension. Manhattan glittered outside like a city made of glass, beautiful, fragile, and full of illusions. For the first time in decades, Jonathan saw his uncle clearly, not as a protector, but as a man who had kept him from his own child. "I'm going to find out everything," Jonathan said. "Everything Caroline tried to tell me. Everything you didn't." Harrison's face hardened. "Be careful, Jonathan. There's no coming back from this." "I don't want to come back," Jonathan replied. "Not to the man you turned me into." As Harrison stormed out, Jonathan turned to his desk and opened his laptop again. He searched until he found it, a fundraising page for Margaret Anderson. A small photo showed Lily, her grandmother, and a desperate plea for help. A modest apartment in Brooklyn. That's where they were. That's where he was going. And this time, he wasn't walking away. The results arrived in a plain white envelope that held more weight than any billion-dollar contract Jonathan Reed had ever signed. He sat alone in his penthouse office, the lights of Manhattan glittering behind him like stars pretending to be something more than they were. But even the view from the 72nd floor couldn't distract him from the trembling in his hands. He had delayed opening it for almost an hour. Not because he doubted, but because deep down, he didn't know what scared him more, if the test confirmed Lily was his, or if it didn't. With a deep breath, Jonathan tore the seal and unfolded the single page. His eyes scanned the bold line in the center of the report. Probability of paternity, 99.99998%. Time seemed to slow. He sank into his chair, the paper trembling between his fingers as a rush of emotions hit him like a tidal wave. Relief. Awe. Guilt. Terror. The little girl selling cookies on Fifth Avenue, the one with hazel eyes flecked with gold and his mother's auburn hair, was his daughter. He had a child. Had been a father for 6 years without knowing. He stared at the confirmation again, his chest tightening. "Lily, my daughter," he whispered aloud for the first time. The word sounded foreign in his mouth but sacred in his soul. Before he could process more, the intercom buzzed, shattering the silence. "Sir," came his assistant's voice, hesitant, "I also found what you requested, mail and call logs from 10 years ago. I've placed the folder on your desk." Jonathan's eyes darted to the leather-bound file. He hadn't noticed it arrive. With trembling hands, he flipped it open and began to read. 7 calls. All from Caroline Anderson. Marked, handled, yet never forwarded to him. 3 letters. Logged as received, but with no evidence they were ever opened. His jaw clenched. His heart thundered. Each entry was dated during the months after he left for London, right when Caroline would have discovered she was pregnant. His voice was tight when he pressed the intercom again. "Who handled this correspondence?" A brief pause. Then the reply came, almost apologetic. "All mail and calls during your London assignment were managed through Mr. Harrison's office. Standard protocol." Jonathan froze. Harrison. The man who raised him after his parents died. The man who taught him how to command boardrooms and bend markets. The man who shaped him into the billionaire he had become. And the man who had deliberately kept his daughter from him. The betrayal hit harder than anything Jonathan had ever experienced. It wasn't just business. This was blood. Family. His phone rang. Margaret Anderson's name flashed across the screen. He answered instantly. "Mr. Reed," her voice was strained, urgent. "The hospital called. My insurance denied the specialized treatment again. We don't know what else to do." Jonathan was already moving. "I'll handle it," he said, voice low and steady. "Send me the doctor's info and hospital details." "There's more," Margaret added hesitantly. "A man came asking questions about us. Said he was conducting a background check. He asked about Caroline, about whether we'd had contact with you before last week." Jonathan's steps slowed. His blood ran cold. "Did he say who he was working for?" "No," she replied. "But I have a feeling you already know." Jonathan didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. Only one person in his life would have both the resources, and the motivation, to investigate Margaret and Lily behind his back. "Harrison. Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. "And Margaret?" "I got the test results." A long silence. "I never doubted it," she finally said. "She has your stubborn eyes. Caroline always said that was your best and worst quality." As the call ended, Jonathan stood motionless by the window, the city below spinning on like nothing had changed. But everything had. He had a daughter. And someone had stolen 6 years from them both. Now, Jonathan Reed was going to make damn sure no one ever stole another second. Jonathan Reed stood at the edge of the playground in Central Park, watching Lily Anderson chase after a butterfly with the boundless energy only a 6-year-old could muster. Her laughter echoed against the bare trees, filling the late autumn air with a sound so pure, so unexpected, that it tightened something deep in his chest. It had been less than a week since he'd confirmed, irrefutably, that she was his daughter. And yet, every moment spent with her felt both brand new and somehow long overdue. This was their 3rd meeting. Margaret Anderson, still wary, had insisted on public places, parks, cafes, and libraries, where she could observe from a distance and step in if needed. Jonathan hadn't argued. He understood the gravity of her role, of the years she'd spent protecting Lily when no one else had. "Mr. Reed, look!" Lily called out, holding up a dandelion puff. She rushed back to him, her auburn curls bouncing. "Make a wish." He knelt to her level, smiling. "A wish, huh? What do I do?" "Close your eyes," she instructed seriously. "Then blow, but you can't tell me what you wished for." He obeyed. Eyes closed, he thought not of corporate acquisitions or stock indexes, but of time. Time to make memories. Time to be the father he never got to be. He opened his eyes and blew gently. The seeds scattered into the wind. Lily giggled. "Good job, Mr. Reed. That means your wish will come true." "I hope so," he said softly, then added, "What would you wish for?" Lily didn't hesitate. "That grandma gets better soon. And maybe to keep seeing you." Jonathan blinked. The sincerity in her voice pierced through his carefully composed facade like a dagger. This little girl didn't know the storm raging inside him, the guilt, the grief, the longing. She only knew kindness, and that the man who bought her cookies smiled like her in the sunlight. As they walked together toward a nearby bench where Margaret sat knitting under a blanket, Lily slipped her small hand into his. It was a natural, innocent gesture, but it nearly brought him to his knees. "How was she today?" Margaret asked, not looking up. "A handful," Jonathan replied with a soft chuckle. "But a brilliant one." "She likes you," Margaret said plainly. "Too quickly, maybe. Children are like that, open hearts, no armor." Jonathan lowered his gaze. "I don't deserve it." "No," she agreed. "But that doesn't mean you can't earn it." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching Lily twirl in circles, arms outstretched, pretending to be a bird. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Margaret, I know we agreed to keep things slow. Visits like this, measured. But I'd like to do more. Be more involved." She finally looked at him, eyes sharp beneath silvering brows. "And what exactly does that mean?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "Homework help. School pickups. Bedtime stories, maybe. I missed the first 6 years. I don't want to miss the rest." Margaret studied him. "That child thinks you're a kind stranger who likes cookies and stars. If she knew the truth, what would you say?" Jonathan exhaled. "That I didn't know. And that if I had, I would have chosen her. Every single time." A long pause followed. Then Margaret nodded slowly. "We'll take it one step at a time. For her sake." Lily came bounding back, cheeks flushed with cold. "Mr. Reed, can you help me find sticks? I'm building a fairy house." He stood, brushing snow off his coat. "Of course, Professor Anderson. Lead the way." As she ran ahead, Margaret spoke quietly behind him. "She calls you Mr. Reed now. But if you keep showing up like this, she might start calling you something else." Jonathan's heart leapt. He followed Lily's laughter into the trees, his polished shoes crunching over fallen leaves, his soul stumbling toward redemption, one fairy stick at a time. Jonathan stood in the doorway of the newly finished room, his breath catching in his throat. The walls were painted a rich twilight blue, just as he'd asked, the exact shade of sky that blanketed Manhattan right before the first stars appeared. Tiny constellations glowed softly overhead, embedded in the ceiling like a secret sky that only came to life at night. Built-in bookshelves lined one side of the wall, already stocked with classic storybooks, astronomy guides, and picture books on science and art. A window seat overlooked Central Park, framed with soft navy cushions stitched with silver thread that shimmered like falling stardust. It was perfect. It had to be. Jonathan checked the time again. Margaret and Lily would be arriving any minute. For the last 2 weeks, since Margaret's hospitalization, Lily had been staying with him. What started as an emergency plan had blossomed into something steady, something warm, something he was afraid to name too quickly. Every morning they had breakfast together. She would sit across from him at the kitchen island, swinging her legs and quizzing him on multiplication tables, always calling him Mr. Reed even now, after everything. She still didn't know the whole truth. Not yet. But this room was the beginning. A place just for her. Not a guest room. Not a favor. A declaration. The elevator chimed softly. He hurried out to meet them. Lily stepped into the penthouse first, her backpack bouncing behind her. Her eyes were wide, taking in the apartment's vast open space like she was stepping onto another planet. "You live here?" she asked, craning her neck toward the tall glass windows that revealed a glowing skyline. "I do," Jonathan said with a smile. "But today, I have something to show you. Come with me." He led her down the hallway, Margaret following at a slower pace with her cane. They stopped in front of a closed white door with a brass handle shaped like a crescent moon. "What is it?" Lily asked, curiosity lighting up her voice. Jonathan's heart pounded. He opened the door and stepped aside. "This," he said gently, "is for you." Lily stepped into the room slowly. Her small figure seemed to freeze under the soft ceiling glow. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she whispered, "It's the sky." Jonathan's throat tightened. "I remembered how much you love stars," he said, forcing his voice to stay even. "I thought maybe, if you ever needed a place to stay, or just a place to dream, this could be yours." Lily walked to the bookshelf and ran her fingers across the titles. Then she turned to the window seat and climbed onto it, gazing out at the park. "You made this? For me?" He nodded, his voice catching. "Yes. Just for you." Margaret stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, emotion brimming in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but her nod was enough. "Permission." "A bridge." Lily turned back to him, her eyes brimming. "No one's ever made me a whole room before. Not even Mommy. We always shared." Jonathan crossed the room slowly and knelt beside her. "You don't have to share anymore. This is yours. Your books. Your bed. Your stars." She stared at him for a beat longer, then suddenly threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." He held her close, his arms trembling slightly. "You're welcome, sweetheart." Later that night, as he stood outside her room, watching her fall asleep beneath a canopy of constellations, Jonathan realized something profound. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing numbers or deals or legacy. He was simply trying to be a father. And that room, filled with stars and dreams, was the first step in building a home. Not of walls or wealth, but of love. The boardroom felt colder than usual that morning, despite the sunlight filtering through the high-rise windows of Reed Investments. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, impeccably dressed as always, but the air around him had shifted. He was no longer the man who once commanded rooms with quiet intimidation and a laser focus on quarterly growth. Now, he was a man who left meetings early for school pickups, who asked about ballet recitals between stock reports. And the board noticed. Across from him, Harrison Reed adjusted his cufflinks with theatrical precision. He was flanked by several board members, most loyal, some wary. "You've missed 4 board meetings in 6 weeks, Harrison began, voice clipped. "Delegated key relationships. Reorganized departments without prior consultation. And now this restructuring proposal?" He slid a thick folder across the glossy mahogany table. "You're reducing your operational role by 40%. Jonathan didn't flinch. "I'm streamlining. Focusing on strategic initiatives, mentoring the next generation of leadership. It's what we need." Harrison's voice sharpened. "Coincidentally, ever since that child entered your life, everything's changed. You're distracted, sentimental. It's affecting your judgment. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Her name is Lily, he said firmly. And yes, I've reprioritized. Because being a father requires time. A few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One cleared his throat, murmuring something about optics. Harrison leaned forward, expression unreadable. Have you considered what this means for the Reed legacy? Jonathan met his gaze without blinking. I'm enhancing it. Creating a structure that doesn't rely on one man burning himself out. The company survives beyond me. Harrison gave a slow, almost mocking smile. I've protected this family's interests for 40 years. When your father died, leaving debt and disgrace, I rebuilt everything. When you nearly tanked the firm in 2008, I salvaged our name. And when that woman, Caroline, tried to derail your future with a child, I kept you on track. The words landed like a slap. Jonathan's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. Intercepting her letters. Blocking her calls. That was your version of protection? She would have destroyed your trajectory, Harrison replied without remorse. You weren't ready for fatherhood. You were building something bigger than bedtime stories and birthday parties. You were wrong, Jonathan said, standing slowly. I was ready. I just didn't know it because you made sure I never found out. Silence. Heavy. Loaded. You see weakness in love, Harrison. In family. But you're blind to the power it brings. Lily made me stronger. More focused. More human. And that's what makes me better, at business, at life. Harrison rose too, stiff, defiant. Sentiment will pass, Jonathan. And when it does, you'll regret this. Maybe, Jonathan said, stepping closer. But I'll never regret showing up for my daughter. Not once. The boardroom door opened quietly, as if the building itself was afraid of the tension. Jonathan turned, lifting the folder off the table, and walked out without another word. His phone buzzed as the elevator doors closed behind him. A text from Margaret. Lily's science presentation today. She hopes you can make it. Jonathan smiled softly. He wasn't going to miss it. Not for the world. The cold wind bit at Jonathan Reed's collar as he checked his watch again. He was already late. The traffic leaving Midtown had been brutal, but it wasn't the traffic that had him on edge, it was the fear of being too late for something that finally mattered. For most of his life, he had been late to everything that wasn't business. But not today. Not again. Lily's science presentation. It was just a second-grade project to most, but to her, it was everything. He finally pulled up in front of the small brick elementary school in Brooklyn, a stark contrast to the glass towers of Wall Street he usually navigated. Slipping out of the black car, he jogged up the steps, his breath forming clouds in the crisp afternoon air. Inside the school's tiled hallway, children's artwork lined the walls, colorful and chaotic, a different world than his usual boardrooms. He passed a classroom door cracked open, hearing laughter and nervous chatter. Peeking in, his eyes landed on her. Lily stood near a table with a solar system model made from foam balls and glitter paint. She kept glancing toward the door, her small hands fidgeting. The teacher leaned down to speak to her. "Ready, Lily?" the teacher asked kindly. "You're up first." Lily hesitated. "Can I wait just a minute longer?" "Mr. Reed said he might come." Jonathan stepped inside just as those words left her mouth. "Sorry I'm late," he called out gently. "Traffic." Lily's head whipped around. Her face lit up like the sun in her model. "You came. I promised, didn't I?" He took a seat in the back, his heart thudding as she walked confidently to the front of the room. Her voice was small but sure as she explained the orbits, planets, and how stars are born and die. Jonathan didn't hear most of it, his eyes were locked on her, mesmerized. This wasn't a business pitch. This was his daughter. And she was brilliant. When she pointed to the Saturn ring they'd glued together last night, she smiled right at him. After the presentation, the classroom erupted in polite applause. Lily ran to him, her eyes glowing. "My teacher said I did amazing." "You were better than amazing," he said, ruffling her hair. "You were out of this world, Professor Anderson." She laughed. "Can we still go get hot chocolate like you said?" "Of course. Let's go celebrate." They walked together, hand in hand, down the school steps. As they passed through the gate, she suddenly went quiet. "Mr. Reed," she began carefully, "why didn't I know you before?" Jonathan's steps slowed. The question landed like a blade between his ribs. "Were you friends with Mommy?" she asked. "Did you know her before I was born?" He exhaled, kneeling beside her. "Yes, I did know your mommy. A long time ago. And I loved her very much. But I didn't know about you, Lily. Not until I met you that day on the street." She studied his face with serious eyes far older than 6 years. "Grandma said Daddy couldn't come to Mommy's important things. That's why she always came alone." Jonathan swallowed hard. "I didn't come because I didn't know. I would have been there for everything, Lily. I would have never missed a thing. I'm so sorry." She nodded slowly, then slipped her hand back into his. "It's okay. You came today. That's what matters." Jonathan blinked away the sting in his eyes. This child, the one he hadn't known existed just months ago, was healing parts of him he didn't know were broken. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about missed meetings or quarterly projections. He was thinking about how to make sure he never missed another moment like this again. The living room was quiet, almost too quiet. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting warm beams across the floor, but the air was charged with unspoken truth. Jonathan Reed sat on the edge of the soft gray sofa, palms damp, heart racing. Beside him, 6-year-old Lily sat cross-legged, her ever-curious eyes darting between him and her grandmother, Margaret Anderson, who was seated in her worn armchair with a knitted blanket across her lap. She knew. They both did. Now it was time Lily knew, too. Jonathan cleared his throat, trying to summon words that wouldn't come out fractured. "Lily," he began gently, "do you remember that photo you showed me? The one with your mommy and your daddy?" Lily nodded, her tiny shoulders straightening. "Yes. Mommy kept it safe. She said Daddy was special. She told me he lived far away and someday he'd come." Jonathan's heart clenched. "That man in the picture, that's me." For a moment, Lily didn't react. She blinked, once, then again. Her mouth opened slightly, eyes wide. "You?" she whispered. "You're my daddy?" Jonathan nodded, barely able to breathe. "Yes, sweetheart. I am." A long silence hung in the air, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. "But, you never came before," Lily said, her voice trembling, confused. "Mommy said Daddy lived far away, but you didn't come." Margaret leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Your mommy tried, Lily. She tried very hard to reach him. She called, she wrote letters, even went to his office once. But the messages never got through. He didn't know." "I didn't know about you," Jonathan added, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not until that day on the sidewalk when you were selling cookies. The moment I saw you, I felt something deep. And then you dropped that photo. I knew. I've been trying, ever since, to be part of your life. To be what you deserve." Lily stared at him. Her lower lip quivered. "Is that why you made me the room with the stars? And helped me with math? And took me to the planetarium?" Yes, he said softly, tears rising. Because I love you. More than I ever thought possible. She was quiet for a long time. Jonathan feared he'd said too much, too soon. Then she spoke, her voice barely a breath. But, you didn't know me before. How can you love me now? Jonathan leaned closer, taking her small hands in his. Because the moment I knew who you were, you became the most important part of my life. I can't change the past, Lily. I wish I could. But I promise you, I'll never leave you again. Not ever. Lily studied his face as only a child could, direct, fearless, honest. Then, her expression softened. Grandma, did you know he was my daddy? Margaret nodded solemnly. Your mother told me. And yes, I was angry for a long time. But I've seen how much he cares about you. That matters now. Lily turned back to Jonathan, her hazel eyes filled with something he hadn't dared hope for, trust. If you're my daddy, she said slowly, can I call you Dad now? Instead of Mr. Reed? Jonathan's breath caught. He smiled through the tears he could no longer hold back. Nothing would make me happier. With that, Lily climbed onto his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder. I always wanted a dad, she whispered. Outside, the winter wind brushed softly against the windows, but inside, time seemed to pause. For the first time, truly and fully, they were no longer strangers. They were a family. Jonathan stood by the tall window of his penthouse, watching the afternoon sun melt into golden streaks over Central Park. The city buzzed below, as relentless as ever, but his world had slowed into something quieter, more sacred. Lily was in the next room, her room, curled up on a window seat built just for her, completely absorbed in a book about constellations. He could hear her voice now and then, softly reading out loud, mispronouncing long scientific terms with fierce confidence. And every time she looked up and smiled at him, he still had to remind himself it was real. His daughter. His daughter. Just a few days ago, the adoption paperwork had been finalized. Lily Anderson was now, officially, Lily Anderson Reed. The judge had smiled warmly as he signed the final form, but Jonathan's hand had trembled. Not because he was afraid, but because the moment was too big for a man who had once thought spreadsheets and billion-dollar deals were the only meaningful commitments he'd ever make. Now, all he wanted was to be the kind of man his daughter deserved. Their new life had begun to take shape in small but life-changing ways. His days no longer revolved around opening bells and quarterly projections, but around school pickups, bedtime stories, and Lily's laughter echoing through his glass and steel sanctuary. The penthouse, once cold and minimalistic, now shimmered with life. There were art supplies on the kitchen counter, science projects on the coffee table, and a drawing taped proudly to the fridge that said, "My dad is a star." Every morning, they had breakfast together. Margaret, still recovering but stronger every day, would sip tea while Lily discussed planets and poetry. Jonathan had hired a gentle housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who doted on Lily like a second grandmother, but Jonathan insisted on packing Lily's lunchbox himself. He took pride in getting her sandwich crusts just right. He'd restructured everything, his entire company. His role at Reed Investments had been scaled back, allowing a new executive team to handle day-to-day operations. It raised eyebrows in the business world, but Jonathan didn't care. He'd spent 20 years building an empire, but it was only now, folding laundry with Lily, that he understood what legacy really meant. And yet, not all moments were bright. There were still shadows. Nights when Lily would stare at the ceiling in her constellation-themed bedroom and whisper questions about her mother. Or worse, when she wouldn't say anything at all. Jonathan would sit by her side, unsure of how to fill the silence. Caroline's absence was a wound they both shared, bleeding quietly beneath the surface. One night, after a difficult bedtime, Lily had asked, "Daddy, if Mommy were still here, would you have still come to find me?" The question gutted him. He knelt beside her bed and took her hand. "I don't know what would have happened," he said honestly. "But I believe the universe was always trying to bring us together. I think Mommy knew that." Lily nodded slowly. "I think she's still watching." Margaret's recovery, too, brought both joy and fragility. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but she moved slower now. Jonathan insisted she stay with them full-time. He had a guest suite modified into a peaceful retreat, filled with books and warm light, the way Caroline would have liked it. As winter gave way to spring, their trio began to function like a real family. Lily would walk into his home office, mid-Zoom call, wearing a cape made of blankets, declaring she was the queen of the moon. And Jonathan? The man who once rescheduled board meetings to the millisecond, he'd excuse himself from a billion-dollar merger just to kneel and bow to her royal majesty. Because nothing, not a company, not a portfolio, not even his past, meant more than this little girl with auburn hair and a laugh that cracked open his guarded heart. This was his second chance. And he wasn't going to waste it. The hospital waiting room was too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against Jonathan Reed's chest like a weight. He sat motionless, eyes fixed on the pediatric emergency sign above the swinging double doors, fists clenched in his lap. Lily, his daughter, was behind those doors. His 6-year-old girl, who just that morning had been giggling about constellations and asking if stars had birthdays. Now she was vomiting, feverish, and barely responsive. Margaret's voice on the phone had been frantic. "Jonathan," it came on suddenly. 1 minute she was drawing at the table, the next she was on the floor. He'd raced to their Brooklyn brownstone like a man possessed, breaking every traffic law between Tribeca and Crown Heights. Nothing else mattered. Not work. Not investors. Not even Reed Investments. Just Lily. A doctor finally emerged, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Reed?" He stood so quickly the chair behind him screeched across the tile. "How is she?" "She's stable for now. We've administered fluids, and her fever is coming down. But the cause of her symptoms, it wasn't a virus." Jonathan blinked. "Then what was it?" "We found trace amounts of benzodiazepine in her system, an anti-anxiety medication. Dangerous for a child her size. It appears to have been ingested, possibly through food or drink." Jonathan's world tilted. "No one in our home takes anything like that. I'm meticulous, so is Margaret. There's no way she could have." His voice caught mid-sentence. Then it hit him like a train. Hot chocolate. Lily's favorite. The only thing she had that wasn't freshly made that day. And the container had been sitting in the pantry untouched, until last week. Until Harrison visited. His heart seized in his chest. He turned sharply, pulled out his phone, and called his head of security. "I want the penthouse swept," Jonathan said, voice low and dangerous. "Every food item, every bottle, every container. And get me the security footage from the past 7 days. Everything." "Yes, sir," came the immediate response. But Jonathan already knew. The chill in his veins wasn't just from fear anymore, it was rage. Controlled, burning, quiet rage. Hours later, the results arrived. Traces of lorazepam, the same prescription Harrison had been taking for years, were found in the hot chocolate mix. The security footage showed Harrison lingering in the kitchen, alone, while Jonathan was distracted with a phone call. It was all there, indisputable, horrifying. Jonathan sat alone in his office, fists pressed to his forehead, the footage frozen on the screen in front of him. The man who had raised him. The man who taught him how to tie a tie, how to negotiate billion-dollar mergers, how to read the markets like scripture, had poisoned his daughter. Not out of madness. Not even hatred. But out of control. To manipulate. To scare him. To remind him who really held the power. Except now, Jonathan knew something Harrison never would, what it meant to truly love someone more than yourself. His phone buzzed beside him. Margaret, she's asleep. Colors back in her cheeks. Jonathan stared out at the city skyline. He had built empires. But this was war. Not in the boardroom, not on Wall Street, but for Lily. For her future. And this time, he would burn everything down to protect what truly mattered. He closed the laptop and whispered into the quiet, "You chose the wrong child to hurt, Harrison." The next time they faced each other, it wouldn't be as mentor and protege. It would be as father, an avenger. Jonathan stood at the tall windows of his office on the 72nd floor, watching rain bleed down the glass in slow, shimmering lines. Below him, Manhattan pulsed with life, horns blaring, lights flickering, but inside the office, a storm far more personal brewed. On his desk lay a manila folder containing medical reports, security footage screenshots, and a forensic lab analysis. All evidence pointed to one horrifying truth: Harrison Reed, the man who had raised him like a son, had deliberately poisoned his daughter. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Reed, your uncle is here." Jonathan didn't turn from the window. "Send him in." The door opened with a soft click. Harrison entered, as impeccably dressed as ever in a navy cashmere coat and silk tie, his expression unreadable. He moved with practiced ease, settling into the leather chair across from Jonathan's desk as if this were just another strategy meeting. "You've been avoiding my calls," Harrison began, voice smooth and controlled. "I've been busy," Jonathan replied, still facing the window. Harrison gave a short, humorless chuckle. "So I gathered. Security details? Hospital bills? And quite the media silence around your daughter's recent illness." Jonathan turned slowly, stepping behind his desk. "Lily's feeling better, thanks for asking." Children bounce back. "It's remarkable, really," Harrison said, folding one leg over the other. Jonathan pressed a button beneath the desk, locking the office door with a quiet metallic thud. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" Jonathan walked to the desk, picked up the folder, and laid it down between them. "That's the toxicology report. It shows benzodiazepines in Lily's bloodstream. A dosage strong enough to hospitalize a child." He opened the folder to reveal still images from security footage: Harrison in the kitchen of Jonathan's penthouse, standing over the hot chocolate container. "You were the only visitor that day," Jonathan said, his voice low and cold. "And that's you, tampering with something my daughter drinks every night." Harrison's face twitched, just once, before his calm mask slid firmly back into place. "I was merely adjusting her environment," he said. "Adjusting?" Jonathan's voice rose. "You drugged a 6-year-old girl. You nearly killed her." "I calculated a reaction, not a fatality," Harrison said, as if discussing a market trend. "Enough to suggest instability. Nothing permanent." Jonathan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Why?" he demanded. "Because I put her name on an adoption form? Because I gave her a place in this family?" "She's not family," Harrison snapped. "She's a wild card. An interloper. You're sacrificing everything we've built for some emotional illusion." "She's my daughter," Jonathan growled. "And I'll burn everything we've built to the ground before I let you harm her again." Harrison stood, face darkening. "I made you. Don't forget that." "No," Jonathan said quietly, stepping forward. "You made someone who couldn't love, couldn't trust, couldn't connect. But Lily changed that. She gave me a reason to become a better man. Something you'll never understand." He reached into a drawer, pulled out a thick envelope, and tossed it onto the desk. "What is this?" "Your severance from Reed Investments," Jonathan said. "Effective immediately. Your shares remain. But you're out. No board seat. No decision-making power. No access to my daughter. Ever. You wouldn't dare, Harrison hissed. I already did. Jonathan's voice was like steel. Harrison's eyes narrowed into slits. You'll regret this. Jonathan met his gaze, unflinching. You regret losing power. I regret not being there the day my daughter was born. But I'm here now, and nothing is more important than protecting her. Harrison moved toward the door, then paused. When she grows up, she'll learn the truth. That you left her mother. That you abandoned them. She already knows, Jonathan said softly. And she forgave me. The door clicked shut behind Harrison. For a long moment, Jonathan just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the empty chair where the man who raised him had sat. Then he looked down at the family photo Lily had drawn, him, Lily, and Margaret beneath a star-filled sky. His real legacy had nothing to do with boardrooms or empires. It lived in the love of a child, and that, he would never let anyone take from him again. The first snow of Christmas Eve dusted Manhattan in soft white, like powdered sugar on the rooftops. Inside Margaret Anderson's modest apartment, warmth radiated from the small kitchen where cinnamon and cloves danced in the air. Twinkling lights wrapped around a miniature pine tree in the corner, ornaments handmade by Lily swaying gently as the heater kicked on. Jonathan Reed stood at the threshold, holding a stack of neatly wrapped gifts and something far heavier, nervous anticipation. He had been invited to Christmas dinner. Margaret had extended the invitation with cautious formality, but he understood what it meant, a gesture of trust. This was no longer just a visit. It was a test, a quiet examination of whether he truly belonged in the life of the granddaughter she'd raised alone. Mr. Reed. Lily squealed the moment she opened the door, her face radiant beneath her red velvet dress. She launched into his arms without hesitation. You came. Just like you promised. Jonathan hugged her tight, marveling at how natural it felt now. Of course I did, Professor, he smiled, using their shared nickname. Merry Christmas. Margaret greeted him with a polite nod, her expression reserved but not unfriendly. Dinner's almost ready. You're just in time. The evening unfolded in a gentle rhythm, baked ham, mashed potatoes, and Margaret's signature cranberry-orange stuffing. They ate around the table, sharing stories. Margaret told tales of Caroline's childhood Christmases, her daughter's obsession with wrapping presents so meticulously that no one wanted to open them. Lily giggled, her plate overflowing with holiday treats, and Jonathan listened, devouring every morsel of Caroline's memory like a man starved for years. After dessert, he cleared his throat and reached beneath the table, retrieving a small stack of wrapped boxes. I brought something for both of you. Nothing extravagant, he added quickly, glancing at Margaret. I remembered the rules. Lily tore into the packages with glee, a children's astronomy encyclopedia, a handcrafted wooden music box that played Clair de Lune, Caroline's favorite, and a delicate silver bracelet with a star charm. When she opened the last one, her hands trembled. Jonathan knelt beside her. That star, he said, voice soft, represents your mom. Always watching, always guiding. Lily looked up at him, eyes glassy with wonder. It's so pretty, she whispered. Then, without fanfare, she disappeared into her room. A moment later, she returned, holding a crayon drawing clutched in both hands. I made you something too, she said shyly, handing it over. Jonathan unfolded the paper slowly. It was a child's depiction of 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a night sky filled with stars. That's me, you, Grandma, Lily explained, pointing, and Mommy as a star watching over us. His breath caught in his chest. Tears welled uninvited, and he didn't fight them. He dropped to one knee, cradling the drawing like it was made of porcelain. Lily, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her tightly, swallowing the lump in his throat. From the corner of the room, Margaret watched silently, her eyes misty. She had seen many Christmases, some joyful, some bleak, but none quite like this. Something fragile yet powerful had taken root here. A beginning. A second chance. As the night deepened and carols drifted faintly from a nearby radio, Jonathan sat on the couch with Lily nestled beside him, her bracelet twinkling in the firelight. Margaret sat in her chair, her knitting forgotten on her lap, her face calm. For the first time in a long time, there was peace. Jonathan looked down at his daughter, and smiled. He had spent decades conquering markets, but here, in this small living room filled with laughter and memories, he had discovered the truest kind of wealth. Love. Forgiveness. Family. And a star watching from above. The quiet of Jonathan Reed's office was broken only by the ticking of the vintage wall clock and the low hum of the city beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. He had stayed late, as usual, but not for business. Not tonight. The chair across from his desk was already occupied, by someone who looked entirely out of place amid the marble floors and steel finishes. Margaret Anderson sat silently, a weathered shoebox resting on her lap. "She's doing well," she said after a long pause. "Lily. Her health is good. Her spirits too." Jonathan nodded, his heart full but heavy. "She's changed everything." Margaret offered a faint smile. "That's what children do." She looked down at the box in her hands and gently placed it on the coffee table between them. "Before you go any deeper into Lily's life, there are things you need to know. Things Caroline would have wanted you to understand. I waited until I was sure. Now I am." Jonathan leaned forward, tension coiling in his chest. "What is it?" Margaret opened the lid. Inside, dozens of envelopes lay stacked and bundled together with string. Some were faded, others still crisp. All were addressed to Jonathan Reed, at various locations, his old Manhattan apartment, the London office, the penthouse. "She wrote to you," Margaret said softly. "For years. After you left." Jonathan's breath caught. His hand reached out slowly, trembling, and took the top letter. The postmark dated back nearly a decade, 7 months after he'd left for London. "I never received any of these," he said, voice raw. "I know," Margaret replied. "But Caroline didn't. She believed you chose silence." His hands shook as he opened the letter. Caroline's handwriting danced across the page, elegant, familiar, heartbreakingly vulnerable. "Jonathan. I've written this letter a dozen times in my mind. There's no easy way to say this. I'm pregnant. Our child, yes, ours, is due in February. I know we ended things and you made your choice. I respect that. I'm not writing to disrupt your life or make demands. I simply believe you have the right to know. If you want no part of this child's life, I'll understand. But if any part of you wants connection, the door is open. Always. Caroline." Jonathan blinked back tears as he read it again. And again. She never wanted anything from me. Just to give me the chance to know. She waited for a reply that never came, Margaret said. She called. She showed up at your office once, 7 months pregnant. His heart pounded. I was in London. Harrison, he handled all correspondence. Margaret's eyes narrowed. He did more than handle it. He buried it. Jonathan nodded slowly, the weight of it all pressing down. He didn't think I was ready. Margaret reached for another envelope, this one newer, with slightly uneven handwriting. She wrote this in the hospital, a week before she died. She asked me to keep it until I knew you were ready. With reverent hands, Jonathan opened it. Jonathan. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I never told Lily the full truth. I didn't want her to feel unwanted. I just said her father lived far away. But if you found her, if you're reading this, I believe you're ready. Love her. That's all I ask. I forgive you. Caroline. The tears came freely now. Jonathan pressed the letter to his chest and bowed his head. She never knew I would have come back, he whispered. But she hoped you might, Margaret said quietly. She left that door open. Just in case. Jonathan looked up, eyes burning with grief and purpose. I missed everything. Her birth. Her first words. Her childhood. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. You can still be her father now. And in that moment, amid the shadows of letters never read and love never returned, Jonathan Reed knew exactly what he had to do. He would not miss another moment. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and fresh ink, its high ceilings echoing the quiet footsteps of those passing through its marble halls. Jonathan Reed stood by the window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back as he watched the spring rain streak down the glass. Outside, New York was waking up under a gray sky, but inside him, something much brighter was stirring, an unfamiliar combination of nervousness and joy. Across the room, Lily sat beside Margaret, her legs swinging under the bench, oblivious to the weight of what the morning meant. She was coloring a picture of a star-filled sky, her auburn hair tucked behind one ear, a pink crayon clutched tightly in her small hand. Are you sure you want to do this? Margaret asked quietly, her voice laced with both caution and tenderness as she approached Jonathan. He turned to face her, his expression firm but warm. It's not a question of want. I have to. This is my daughter. And today, the law will finally agree. Margaret studied him for a moment. The lines around her eyes softened. She had watched this man transform over the last few months, from a distant, emotionally frozen executive into a father who read bedtime stories, made slightly burnt pancakes, and rearranged board meetings to catch science presentations. The courtroom door opened. A bailiff stepped in, calling out, Reed versus State of New York. Petition for legal adoption. Jonathan extended a hand toward Lily. You ready, Professor? He asked with a soft smile. Lily jumped off the bench and took his hand without hesitation. Do I have to call the judge, Your Honor? She whispered. He chuckled. Yes. And maybe don't ask her if she has any cookies. They stepped into the courtroom, the judge seated high above them, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose as she scanned the file before her. Mr. Reed, she said, I understand you're petitioning for the legal adoption of Miss Lily Anderson. Yes, Your Honor, Jonathan said clearly, holding Lily's hand firmly. She is my biological daughter. DNA tests confirm it, but more than that, she is my world. The judge glanced at Lily. And you, young lady? Do you want Mr. Reed to be your legal dad? Lily looked up at Jonathan, then at the judge. He already is. I just want it to be on paper too. The judge smiled, amused. Fair enough. She turned to Margaret, who stood beside Lily protectively. And you, ma'am? Do you support this petition? Margaret nodded, her voice thick. I do. Caroline would have too. He's proven it, with every action, every sacrifice. The judge looked over the paperwork one final time, then picked up her pen. Then it is so ordered. Effective immediately, Lily Anderson is hereby recognized as the legal daughter of Jonathan Reed. Jonathan felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been holding his breath for a lifetime. He dropped to one knee, pulling Lily into his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. You're officially stuck with me now, kiddo. Lily laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. Good. Now you can't change your mind. Tears burned at the corners of Jonathan's eyes, and for once, he didn't care who saw them. Margaret turned away, wiping her own, whispering something that sounded like thank you, Caroline. As they left the courtroom, Lily slipped her hand back into Jonathan's. So what's next, Dad? Jonathan paused, savoring the word, Dad. It rang with both finality and a promise. Anything you want, he said. This world is ours now. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were parting, and sunlight broke through in soft golden beams. For the first time in years, Jonathan Reed felt whole, not as a CEO or investor, but as a father. Today wasn't about legacy or wealth. It was about belonging. And Lily, now officially Lily Anderson Reed, belonged to him. And he, finally, belonged to someone too. Jonathan Reed had spent the better part of 2 decades living in high-rise perfection. His Manhattan penthouse, with its sweeping views of Central Park and museum-worthy art collection, was once the ultimate symbol of success. But after everything that had happened, the betrayal, the revelations, the forgiveness, those cold, sterile walls now felt like a museum of a man he no longer was. He needed a home, not a monument. And so, on a chilly March afternoon, Jonathan stood outside a historic brownstone on the Upper West Side, key in hand, heart pounding like a man about to step into a new life. The real estate agent had called it quaint, which was code for slightly crooked staircases and floors that creaked with every step. But to Jonathan, it was perfect. Warm. Human. Alive. The movers had come and gone. The penthouse had been emptied, its sleek modern furniture placed in storage. The brownstone smelled of fresh paint and the faint sweetness of Margaret's herbal tea brewing in the kitchen. Upstairs, Lily's laughter echoed down the stairwell as she explored every corner of her new bedroom. Jonathan climbed the stairs slowly, carrying a small wooden box tucked under his arm. The room he had prepared for her at the penthouse had been beautiful, star-painted ceilings, twilight walls, constellation lights. But this room was different. Here, sunlight poured through the bay window and pooled on the floor like liquid gold. The bookshelves had been built by hand, not designers. The walls weren't magazine perfect, but they were filled with drawings taped up by Lily herself, stick figure families, planets, stars, her favorite animals, and always, her mother watching from above. She turned as he entered. "Daddy," she said, her whole face lighting up. That word still startled him sometimes. Not because he doubted it, but because of the quiet awe it brought each time. "I think I picked the best spot for Grandma's chair." Jonathan smiled. "Let's see." She led him to the corner by the window, where a soft chair had already been placed with a crocheted blanket draped over it. "She can sit here and still see the whole garden," Lily said proudly. "And the sun hits right there in the afternoon." "It's perfect," Jonathan said, his throat tight. He placed the box on her bed. "I brought something for you." Inside was a framed photo of Caroline, one of the few he had left from their time together, and beside it, a second photo, Lily on the swings, laughing, hair flying wild. And finally, the bracelet from Christmas, nestled in velvet. Lily sat beside him, touching each item carefully. "Mommy would like this room," she said softly. Jonathan nodded. "She'd love it. And she'd be so proud of you." Downstairs, Margaret was settling in, her movements slower but steady. After months of treatment, her strength was returning. They'd decided it was time for her to move in permanently. For Jonathan, it wasn't an act of generosity, it was family. They were building something real here, from the ashes of what could have been lost forever. That night, after Lily had gone to sleep, Jonathan stood in the hallway outside her room. The stars on her ceiling glowed softly, a universe just for her. On her nightstand were the same 3 treasures she always kept, the photo of him and Caroline, the star bracelet, and her mother's favorite poetry book. He leaned against the doorframe, listening to the peaceful rhythm of her breathing. The walls that had once displayed abstract canvases and investment awards now held crayon drawings and height charts. His life had changed, not through a hostile takeover or a $1 million deal, but because a little girl had looked up from a cookie stand and said, "You look just like my dad." And she had been right. This house wasn't just a new address. It was a return. To love. To fatherhood. To everything that mattered. Jonathan knew now that wealth could buy you a skyline view, but only love could fill a home with light. The boardroom was colder than usual that morning, though the spring sun poured through the tall windows of Reed Investments headquarters. Jonathan sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by executives in tailored suits, all waiting for him to speak. A sleek presentation screen behind him displayed a new org chart, one that would alter the company's future forever. But for once, he wasn't nervous. "Let's begin," he said, his voice calm but resolute. As the CFO began outlining the revised operational structure, Jonathan's mind drifted, not from disinterest, but from clarity. The decisions had already been made. He'd spent the past 3 months meticulously restructuring Reed Investments. Departments had been streamlined, new executives brought in, and roles redistributed, all with one goal in mind: creating a legacy that Lily could one day be proud of. Not just one built on profit margins, but on principles. It hadn't been easy. The board had resisted at first, questioning his sudden shift in priorities. Some whispered that fatherhood had softened him, dulled the edge that made him one of Wall Street's fiercest strategists. Harrison's influence, though now absent, still lingered like a shadow cast over the long table. But today, that shadow would finally lift. "I know change is uncomfortable," Jonathan said, cutting through the murmurs as he stood. "But our growth isn't just about numbers. It's about meaning. Sustainability. Legacy. I'm not stepping back, I'm stepping forward. Differently." One executive raised his hand cautiously. "And what about Harrison's role?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Harrison Reed is no longer part of this company's operational structure. His retirement is permanent. That's all I'll say publicly." The room went silent. No one dared challenge it. Jonathan didn't need to elaborate. Rumors of Harrison's exile had circulated after the sudden termination of his board privileges and the quiet removal of his name from all internal communications. Few knew the full truth, that Harrison had tried to poison Lily to maintain control over the Reed fortune, but Jonathan wasn't interested in vengeance. He was interested in ending the cycle. And protecting what truly mattered. That evening, Jonathan walked through the quiet halls of their brownstone, the echoes of Lily's laughter filling the space like music. She was in the study, drawing constellations on a new poster for her bedroom ceiling. Margaret sat nearby with a cup of chamomile tea, her recovery more visible by the day. He paused by a framed picture on the hallway wall, Lily, beaming in her planetarium dress, flanked by Jonathan and Margaret. Underneath, in her handwriting, were the words, "Our Galaxy of Love." This was the real legacy. Not stock valuations or headlines. Not Harrison's empire built on power and secrecy. But this, joyful evening spent reviewing homework, Saturday trips to the park, whispered goodnights beneath a starlit ceiling. This was what he'd almost missed, chasing a definition of success written by someone else. He made his way into the study and kissed the top of Lily's head. She looked up and grinned. "Did you conquer your board meeting, Dad?" Jonathan chuckled. "I did. But not with numbers, with truth." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's the best kind of winning." He nodded, his throat tightening. Legacy wasn't about leaving something behind. It was about living it now, through love, through presence, through the child who had saved him the day she offered a cookie and unknowingly handed him his future. Jonathan Reed, once a king of Wall Street, was now something far rarer. A father worth remembering. The soft hush of spring swept over Manhattan, brushing the sidewalks with the delicate flutter of cherry blossoms and coaxing the city out of winter's stillness. In a quiet corner of the Upper West Side, inside a brownstone filled with warmth and second chances, Jonathan Reed stood in the doorway of his daughter's room. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Some moments demanded only silence to be fully felt. Before him, 6-year-old Lily Anderson Reed lay fast asleep beneath her constellation ceiling, the soft blue glow bathing her face in starlight. Her auburn curls spilled across the pillow like wild poetry. One hand clutched a worn stuffed star, the other rested near a framed photo on her bedside table, Jonathan and Caroline, laughing in a moment frozen in time. That photo had once shattered his world. Now it held it together. He stepped quietly into the room, his eyes scanning the space that had been built not just for her, but because of her. The twilight blue walls, the reading nook by the window, the shelves overflowing with books and art supplies. On the dresser sat her silver bracelet with the tiny star charm. Beneath it, a small drawing, crayon figures beneath a starry sky. Him. Lily. Margaret. And above them all, on a cloud, Caroline smiling down. He crouched beside her bed, brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead. She stirred but didn't wake. Her face, even in sleep, carried a kind of trust he had spent months trying to earn, and still didn't feel he fully deserved. "Sleep well, my star," he whispered, the nickname they'd adopted from the first storybook they read together. It had been Caroline's favorite, a quiet legacy passed from mother to daughter, and now to him. Outside the room, the hallway told a different story than it had a year ago. Gone were the cold, minimalist paintings and steel-gray walls of his former penthouse. Here, Lily's handprints in paint. Height markings tracking her growth. A framed poem Caroline had written in college, Margaret had given it to him on her birthday, saying, "She would have wanted you to have this." Jonathan walked to the living room, where Margaret sat knitting by the fireplace. She looked up with tired but peaceful eyes. The cane rested nearby, mostly symbolic now, her remission holding strong. A news article on the coffee table reported Reed Investments' record-breaking quarter, the result of Jonathan's strategic delegation. But none of that mattered to him tonight. "She's asleep?" Margaret asked. He nodded, then walked to the window. Outside, the city pulsed with life, taxis darting beneath lamplight. A year ago, this view had looked like a kingdom. Now, it felt like just a backdrop. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked softly. "That we'd be a family? After everything?" Margaret hesitated, then said, "Caroline did." Jonathan turned. "She always believed in people's ability to change," Margaret continued. "Even when they hurt her. Even when you left, she hoped you'd find your way back." "I should have come back sooner," he said, guilt tightening his voice. "You came back when Lily needed you most. That counts for something. More than something. It was everything." The next morning, they visited Caroline's grave, just as they had on Caroline's birthday, her death anniversary, and the day Lily first called him Dad. Lily placed a drawing in front of the headstone, pressed a white lily beside it, and whispered, "Thank you for my daddy. I'm taking care of him like you said." Jonathan's breath caught. The words mirrored the ones in Caroline's final letter, written in a hospital bed with shaking hands. "If you find Lily, she'll take care of you, too. I believe in both of you." Back at home, as he watched Lily sort puzzle pieces by color and shape, cheeks pink with focus, eyes alive with wonder, Jonathan finally understood what Caroline meant. He had spent his life chasing billions. But the fortune that mattered most had been selling cookies on a sidewalk, waiting to be found. And she had found him, too. His star. His daughter. His redemption. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 1 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.